Janine, I have actually 10 o'clock on the
I do
agenda.
too. That means
That
it's
means
showtime
it is
because we have
showtime.
got a lot to cover today.
Yes, absolutely.
Go.
All right. So welcome everybody. And thank you all for joining us today. You are participating in the Encore Network event titled Filling the Talent Pipeline with Workers Over 50. We're hosting this event today really as a follow-up to the launch of the Encore Network Employers Guide to Engaging Older Workers. It's a 17-page document loaded with great information, really talking about outdated myths about older workers, the value of the older worker, age-friendly policies in the workplace, and much, much more, even a listing of resources. So we wanted to specifically host this session in September, piggybacking on that launch, because September is National Employee Older Adult Month, National Workforce Month, and the last week of the month is National Employee Older Worker Week. So we thought, what better time to really talk more about the talent pipeline, the 50 plus population, how to deploy our guide, how to connect with workforce centers, and some great information today. So this session is going to be 75 minutes long. Please keep yourself on mute. If everybody could please mute themselves, there'll be an opportunity for you to, if you have a comment, a question, just pop it in the chat. That's going to be the first place we look to actually see, what are the questions that have bubbled up when we come to the Q&A session. So on our agenda today, we're going to start with a presentation from the Interim Director and Executive Vice President of the Association of Workforce Boards, Melanie Anderson. She's going to talk to us a little bit more about what a workforce board is, how it connects to a center, and how that really supports older adults. And you're going to want to know about what a board is, whether you're an employer, an older adult who's seeking work, or a stakeholder, because those boards set the foundation. They lay the foundation for what a center does and the populations they serve and the programs they offer. So I'm going to just start out right now with an introduction and a brief bio about Melanie. She is the Executive Vice President, Interim CEO for the National Association of Workforce Boards, AFWB. She is responsible for overseeing operations and maintaining and developing strategic relationships with nonprofit, government, education, and corporate partners. Melanie has provided strategic and thought leadership on workforce development issues within public and private discourse, and has led national and regional discussions on advancing work-based learning with key partners in industry, workforce, and education. In addition, Melanie provides technical assistance to support workforce development boards in implementing strategies and best practices to advance workforce and economic development locally and nationally. So Melanie, I believe you've got a PowerPoint, and we're going to have just a minute or two for a couple of questions after that. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Karen. Really appreciate that kind introduction and for inviting me to this today. Hopefully I can get this technology to work correctly. Let's see if I can get underneath. I can't get to there we go. Okay. All right. Can you see the PowerPoint? Excellent. Thank you. Thrilled to be here. It's, as Karen said, great month, Workforce Development Month. So always excited to talk about workforce boards and how you all can engage with them. So very briefly, National Association of Workforce Boards, we represent the now 583 state and local workforce boards around the country. We help boards basically serve their communities better. We do that through policy and advocacy work, technical assistance and professional development, as well as talking about issues around workforce and workforce boards. We also serve as a convener, helping bring different parts of the community together, really with that workforce board being the center of the workforce conversation in their communities. I'm going to show, if again, technology works correctly, a short video.
What is a workforce development board? A workforce development board is a formal group of community leaders serving a city, a county, or a region that identifies the needs of the local job market, oversees one-stop career centers, and works to coordinate and align workforce development initiatives in their area. workforce development boards with membership from business, local elected officials, labor, economic development, educators, and community leaders foster high-growth career opportunities to meet the needs of their regional economy. This system exists to help businesses find qualified workers to meet their present and future workforce needs and help workers acquire skills for employment opportunities. A workforce development board is the link between a region's workforce talent and its employer skill needs. They convene industry and their workforce and education partners in real time to impact the skilling and reskilling of America's workforce and put people back to work in career pathways that provide self-sufficiency. Together, this diverse group of leaders helps your community target recruitment opportunities, identify labor market trends, partner on economic development investments, and create resources to benefit all members of the community. Every workforce development board has a plan that establishes funding priorities for their area focused on a broad range of worker issues that consider wages, job mobility, access, and equity. By analyzing data and working with local businesses, workforce boards understand what skills are most in demand and foster the necessary training and credential programs for their region. Workforce boards also use outcome data to advise employers, policymakers, and communities about what approaches are successful. So without your local workforce development boards, local businesses, educational institutions, and other community stakeholders would not have a strong voice to represent the unique workforce needs of your community. So, what is a workforce development board? It is a key link to your community's future.
So that's a very high-level overview of what a workforce board is, and I want to go into a little bit more detail on exactly what they do, what their makeup is, and how you all can engage with them. There are pages and pages of laws and regulations about who sits on a workforce board and how they're governed and how they're structured. But I just wanted to give you a brief snapshot of what those board members look like. One of the unique pieces of a workforce board is they're all very locally driven. So it was very important to us that there was flexibility to have local areas determine who sits on their board. One piece we did push very hard for, though, was that the boards are made up predominantly of business. We think that's very important, that they're able to bring their voice to the table, and we think having that business voice ensures that the boards really understand also the job seeker need. This is a very long list of the functions of a workforce board, but I think the way to think about this is they are focused on innovation, they're focused on creativity, and they're focused on setting what the workforce strategy and what the workforce funding is in the community. So keeping that in mind as you're thinking about how to engage with them. So the workforce board is focused on the strategy, but the American Job Centers, we consider them the retail locations. This is the front door where a job seeker will walk into for career counseling, to potentially be connected to job training opportunities, potentially connected to jobs. One interesting piece I like to point out, there are more American Job Centers around the country than there are Home Depots. There's more American Job Centers than there are Targets. So there is an American Job Center in every community, and they're all organized very differently. Some of them might be in your local library. Some of them might be actually housed with an employer. And more American Job Centers are meeting job seekers where they're at, so they're delivering more virtual services. This is again, a quick snapshot of what the board does and what the American Job Centers do. But there are two pieces on here that I really want to draw your attention to. One, the website at the bottom of this slide is how you can find your local workforce board and the contact information so you can reach out. And also just wanted to draw your attention to how you talk to a workforce board. There are a lot of people knocking on their front door. So how you approach them, not just looking for somebody to fill a job, but really thinking of the whole community and what the needs are in a community. I specifically want to spend a few minutes talking about what we're all here to talk about. We know that many Americans are working past what might have been seen as traditional retirement ages. We know the data is telling us that the workforce 55 plus, it will be one of the fastest growing populations. We also know this is a key talent pool for employers. We know through data that employers are struggling to fill those positions, and they're looking for different, whether it's reentry, youth, maybe veterans. And so just that older workforce is a new talent pool for them to think about. I did want to draw your attention to an example of how workforce boards think about this work. While they will serve anyone that walks through the front door, at times they might focus on a particular population. I wanted to draw your attention to a pilot program that the Workforce Board in San Diego focused on around aging workforce program. But what they really thought about, and this was again driven by community partners coming together and really thinking of this idea, and I love this, a returnship, focused on what some needs are from the 55 plus population, making sure finding them this paid returnship and looking at what their needs were around potentially maybe some digital literacy or other skills that they needed to work on through some of these workshops. And thinking about that, what those outcomes were really exciting. And again, this was a pilot for them as they were thinking about, is this an area that we want to focus on? But it gives you a snapshot when a workforce board, again, thinking about strategy and thinking about where they want to put their time and resources, knowing that this might be an area that they were looking at. Again, workforce boards are driven by labor market information. They're driven by what they're hearing from their community partners. So if there is information that you have or you want to engage, the place to start is the workforce board, because they are going to be informing the American Job Centers about what types of services to provide. I will make sure that this PowerPoint is available for everyone. I am happy to answer any questions at any point. My contact information is here. So if you have any specific questions or want to reach out, I am here for that. But I will turn it back to Karen.
Great. Thank you so much, Melanie. And again, I want to emphasize, when you think about a workforce center, know that it serves both the person seeking work and the employers. They have an entire division that really focuses on connecting with those employers, finding out what they want, and then figuring out how to be the bridge to those people seeking work. So it really is all of those pieces are critical for supporting the older adult. I wanted to ask you, Melanie, just a couple of questions. As we think about the fact workforce centers across the U.S., how do they connect with older adults? How do older adults find a workforce center? Is it through, I get laid off, I go to unemployment, or you promote your center?
All of the above. All of workforce centers, I always say, workforce boards are all like snowflakes. They're all different. They approach their work differently. Some of them focus really heavily on outreach, and so that could be through Facebook or Instagram. It could be working with community partners. So you walk into your library or your church and there might be, information. They also work with employers to get their services out. Or it could be you've gone into an unemployment office in your community and you might be connected to the workforce board.
Okay, great. Another question, as I think about the boards and the centers, as they structure policy, are you seeing, are those boards looking at hearing from centers that employers are seeking more older adults, or that more older adults are coming into the centers?
Every 2 years, we put out an operations survey where we do ask the boards what specific populations are they either seeing an increased interest in, or they themselves, like the pilot program I shared in San Diego, they might be focusing on with specialized services. We're about to put one out, and we'll see if we're seeing more interest in that area. But what I will say, what we are hearing from employers is there's a lot of open jobs. right? And they're looking for talent pools that might have in the past been maybe ignored or maybe not front and center as they think about their hiring. And I think of that 55 plus in that area as an area to maybe think about, well, we have some open jobs and maybe we haven't targeted that area, but we should think about that population.
Karen, a question came in from Paul Adler up in the chat and asking if Melanie could talk a little bit about the relationship between workforce development boards and economic development departments that are in many communities. Could you chat with us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. It's a fantastic question. And I hate to give this answer, but it's going to vary. You're going to have areas where that relationship is really key. We just finished our first Workforce Development Leadership Academy through North Carolina State University. And the academy was really created where we had economic development participants, we had workforce board participants, we had community college participants, we had local elected officials, and it was that whole idea of that workforce ecosystem coming together. So it's certainly something that we highlight, we think is important. We celebrate best practices on where economic development and workforce do work together. But it depends on your community.
Okay. Can I ask a follow-up question? Karen, I know you're
That's great.
I'm monitoring the chat. So Jackie from Wellesley made the observation that many workforce development centers maybe need some more advanced services for people age 50 and over. If I'm hearing you correctly, Melanie, the place to champion in that is with our workforce development boards, or if there are people in a community who really want to see more services for age 50 plus, and this is something I hear it changing the narrative all the time, who do we talk to?
The workforce board. They're going to set the strategy. They're going to control the purse strings. They're going to decide. One of the great pieces of the law that governs workforce when it was reauthorized is it really focused on customer-centered design. And I think that's something that you're asking with that question. Going to the workforce board and talking about a particular customer and what their needs are as they think about not just the type of training, but also the supportive services or the wraparound services that are being offered, the type of hours, or as I mentioned, some boards, directing more virtual services. So really focusing in on that customer is something the American Job Center in their delivery, but also the workforce board is in their strategy development.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I do have one other quick question. So you mentioned the survey that you're about to do, and you do it every 2 years. If there is a question or questions tied to the older adult population, is that information that's available to the public? Could we have access to that? Obviously, we're very interested in seeing shifts, and it really helps whether it's an employer, somebody seeking work, or an advocate, how we better position ourselves to play that role to move things forward.
When we do our survey, we do put out a public report. It's available to our members. If you're a non-member, you do have to pay for it. But Karen, I'm happy to send you the information. If we have anything, tidbits about the older workforce that we get from that, I'll send it to you and you can send it on to the group.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Well, thank you. That was great information. I think for me, it helped me understand a lot more about how a board is structured and where I need to go to really influence the dollars and the decisions made by those centers. I do want to move on to the panel discussion. I'm going to introduce Janine Vanderberg, who will be moderating the panel. Janine is the CEO of Encore Roadmap, speaking, writing, and consulting with employers and brands on how to leverage Encore talent and the longevity economy, and offering, thank you, and offering a range of courses and services to help people in the Encore stage of life figure out what's next. She co-founded Changing the Narrative, a leading U.S. campaign to end ageism, and created its award-winning age-friendly workplace initiative, which makes the business case for older workers and intergenerational teams. And in July of 2023, the Colorado Women's Chamber of Commerce named Janine one of the top 25 powerful women in business. So Janine, it's yours.
Great. Karen, thanks so much. And Melanie, thanks so much. I learned so much from even that tidbit. You know, I'm going to follow up with you. So I want to introduce these amazing women on our panel, all of which I am happy to call friends as well as professional colleagues. Karen Brown, who has been interviewing Melanie. She is a thought leader in technology and innovation for older people, focusing on the evolution of how we think about aging in the last half of life and design of new products, services, and policies that improve the lives of older adults. Her areas of focus include workforce development and improving opportunities for older adults to secure and retain work, as well as to increase the supply of talent that can support all of us as we age. She's also active in the entrepreneur community, supporting startups focused on the longevity economy. So welcome again, Karen. Next is Guadalupe Hurt, a 4-time entrepreneur, pro-aging advocate, speaker, blogger, and middle-lessons life strategist. She pens the popular LinkedIn blog, Dear Middle-lesson, which I encourage you to think out. Guadalupe is an amazing writer, a pro-aging stance on the beauty, truths, and opportunities of middle-lessons. She's been featured in media like Forbes, Next Avenue, NPR, Denver Post, and she shares her optimistic outlook at venues like Denver Startup Week, General Assembly, and Microsoft. She's a Facebook Community Accelerator alum, Next Avenue influencer and aging honoree, Encore Network board member, and former co-founder of Second at Women. Lupe, I'm getting tired just reading her bio. You do so much. Helen, last but not least, my friend, Helen Hirsch Spence, who, having spent her first 50 years in schools, both as a student and as educator, epitomizes this idea of what it means to be a lifelong learner. Using her educational leadership experience as a jumping off point, she became a newly minted social entrepreneur in her late 60s. So let's remember this, everyone, dreams don't have an expiration date. Helen founded Top 60 Over 60, a niche age diversity consultancy, after she witnessed firsthand how ageism was impacting her generation and how the upcoming demographic shift would affect North America's social and economic fabric. Her reputation as a thought leader has earned her invitations to speak at conferences, podcasts, and to write for newspapers, magazines, and blogs. She enthusiastically promotes a reframed narrative of aging. So thank you all so much, ladies, for joining us. And I'm going to start questions with kind of a look at trends that affect this whole topic of older worker. And Helen, I'd like to start with you. What trends have you seen emerging that might lead employers to want to attract or retain older workers?
Thanks, Janine, and thanks, Karen and Melanie, for your wonderful background information. So I think the trends that we're seeing are probably not only particular to the United States, but globally. Fertility rates are declining dramatically everywhere. The demographic shift to older is present. I know that there are 10,000 Americans turning 65 every day. In Canada, 1 out of 5 people are already over the age of 65. According to, a number of researchers, there will be a huge shift in jobs going to workers over the age of 55 by 2030, which is a phenomenon, like 150 million. Another trend I would say is that, our lifespans have been extended. The average lifespan today is 82, whereas it had been 30 years ago, 62. And children born today are expected to live, on average to 100 years. There's the talent shortage, I think, that Melanie also referenced. Another new trend is that whole postponement of retirement or the return of workers after COVID and after having having lived through COVID, let's put it that way. 41%, this is a phenomenal figure, 41% of American workers now expect to work beyond the age of 65, whereas 30 years ago, only 12% expected to work that long. So, I mean, what contributes to that as well is the current climate with inflation. You know, we have unreliable markets, retirement accounts have been, at risk. There are very many fewer pension options. So for financial reasons, I'd say a lot of older people see the need to work, but a lot more also are working because they're supporting their adult children, which is also a trend that we did not see beforehand. And there's a whole lot of turnover among younger employees, and older employees are and we'll get into that later, are seen as more reliable or more steadfast in terms of that. The other thing that I find really fascinating is that a lot of older adults, once they retire, realize that they've lost their entire social network. And because they've invested so much time in their work environment, that those are the people who have become their friends. And once they are gone from that environment, it's hard for them to return. So I'll stop there.
So Helen, what I'm hearing from you is that there's the demographic trends as well. There's both demography, but there's also the desire of older workers to work for mission, money, purpose, meaning, and social connection. So Karen, I want to ask you, how do we think that shows up in the unemployment rate? So I know in Colorado, where you and I both hail from, the reported unemployment rate for the 60 plus population is about 1 or 2%. We know that's kind of similar across the United States every time we get a report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Do you think this is accurate, or is there potentially over or under reporting in this category? And I ask this because what I hear about all the time from older adults, because of the work I do, is we are trying to work and we can't get jobs. Talk to me about this.
Janine, I because I've been part of changing the narrative and heard those conversations, I could never reconcile what the state reports, either here in Colorado or across the US, what every state reports, and what actually we hear. So one of the things I was able to do here in Colorado, we do something called the Community Assessment Survey of Older Adults. It's a massive survey. It goes out to 175,000 older adults. And we did it in 2022, and we had something like 24,000 people respond. 24,000 people over 60 responded. And we asked questions about housing and employment, et cetera. I engaged a data expert to look more closely at the data. And surprisingly to the state, we found that 5.2% of those people who responded over 60 indicated that they were seeking work. They were unemployed and seeking work. So again, here in the state of Colorado—
Say that percentage again, Karen.
Just like 5.2 and big. I mean, that's huge. That's almost double the general state. And here in the state, it says 55 to 64 is 1.1, 65 plus is 2%. So huge underreporting. So Melanie, as I think about the workforce centers, my question about outreach, the whole thought I had was there are a lot of older adults who may have left the workforce for 3, 4, 5 years, want to get back in, and maybe don't even know what a workforce center is. So how do we get them in the door to connect with those employers or those programs that will help them upskill, reskill, and next skill?
Okay. I think that's really helpful and maybe helps us kind of reconcile why we keep having these, what I call this perplexing paradox of unfilled jobs, older workers want to work, where's the mismatch there? And Lupe, I would love for you to weigh in. The oldest Gen Xers, which has often been called the overlooked generation, and I think often in this conversation about older workers is also left out. People are talking very often about boomers. Gen Xers are beginning to approach age 60. What might that mean for the workplace?
Yeah, I think it means that we need to start overlooking them, quite honestly said. I mean, plain and simple, right? The idea that in order for us to continue, I mean, based on the statistics that both Helen and Karen just shared, I mean, it's mind-blowing to think that more organizations, more companies are not already approaching their business strategy with a mixed age human capital strategy. Like, honestly, like, why is it that we continue to hire young and we are letting go of our older, more experienced talent. This cannot continue to go on. So what we're advocating, or what we're seeing, is that HR departments, organizations need to take time to evaluate their hiring patterns, their internal processes and programs that are unfortunately sometimes skewed to more of the earlier life stage of our lives, and start to kind of introduce new programs that support the life stages of all of our potential workforce candidates. And so I think it's this idea that, like they were saying, we're living longer. So we're not all retiring at 65. We're looking to retire, quite honestly. And so how can we continue to honor and support and leverage the talents that this workforce or work group brings to the table, in addition to finding ways to create synergistic bridges between our younger counterparts and our older counterparts? It's not an either or at the end of the day. And so I think that people or particular organizations need to reevaluate how they're hiring, how they're, nurturing, what bridges are they currently connecting within their own organization to support the development of their younger counterparts, but also, making sure that they're supporting their more seasoned talent, right? Because I think at the end of the day, if they don't do that now, we are going to get to a point. I think I saw last time in the US Census that by 2060, it's going to be a gray economy at the end of the day. And so if they don't start taking the steps now to prepare, put the foundation, reassess, recalibrate their own kind of approaches to hiring and retaining people, they're going to be in a pickle. At the end of the day, and they're not going to be, their back's going to be against the wall, and no business wants to be in that situation. So the time is now to embrace people of all ages for their talents and skills, and putting that to work for the best of all of us.
Lupe, I think that's got to be our tagline. The time is now to embrace a workforce of all ages. So let's talk a little bit about the business case, because it's not only the right thing to do because of demographics. And Helen, I'd like to start with you. If I'm an employer, one of the many employers that Melanie and the others have talked about facing a talent pipeline shortage, why should I consider older workers?
Well, let me preface.
Reasons. Yeah, go ahead.
I have lots of reasons, but let me.
But you only got 3 minutes, so
I know. But let me preface and let you know that I really believe in the multi-generational workforce. Yeah. But what we need to do is debunk a lot of the myths about older adults, so that we can get that mix. So some of the compelling research has shown that older adults, older workers have greater loyalty to their companies. There tends to be less turnover. Apparently, those over 55 are 3 times less likely to want to change jobs than those who are 18 to 24-year-olds. So therefore, with a lower turnover rate, the cost to retrain or train new workers is also decreased. They tend to be more motivated, more satisfied. Lots of research showing that they're the happiest group of workers, those who are over the age of 65. They exhibit greater professionalism. They tend to be as tech savvy as younger workers, despite the myths. They have very good judgment, and with decision making, you pair all of this with other generations, and you've got a rich workforce. They have really good and different interpersonal and communication skills, which are hugely beneficial. They really also have lost some of their ego along their way. So they're not as intent on being the center of attention or being the boss. And so they're much more collaborative as they get older. They have a high net worth independently of everything else. And we are finding that when you engage older workers in a customer-facing jobs, and those customers tend to be older, there's an increased bottom line and more productivity and greater job satisfaction. So the end result is extremely positive. Let me think. They have a strong work ethic. There's so many compelling reasons. There's
so many things. Okay, yeah. I think you've got this off to a good start. Lupe, I would love to weigh in, have you weigh in as well, because you co-founded Second Act Women, and which did a conference every year, and I was thrilled to participate one year, of women age 40 and over trying to find their second act. What insights did you gain from that might be helpful to help employers better understand the value, not only the value, because we've heard it from Helen, but what older people are looking for in the workforce?
Yeah, no. So this will be actually the third year that we'll be hosting it. My business partner will be hosting that next year. But so what we learned is that ageism, I'm not going to deny it. It affects both genders, without a doubt. However, it disproportionately affects women. But through our conference and conversations within this community, we found that women over 40 are powerhouse professionals. They, just like our younger counterparts, are looking for jobs that are not just to collect a paycheck, but they want to create meaning. They want to join an organization that's creating good. They're more focused on legacy work, on creating impact. And so if they can marry those two and find an organization, even if the paycheck isn't as big as we'd want it to be, they're more willing to kind of go down the route of meaningful work than just simply say, I'm hiring on for the job. And I think that kind of curtails into that idea of what Helen was talking about, the loyalty aspect. They can honestly curb turnover rates. They want to, work in an organization where they feel supported, where they feel seen and valued, just like any other employee. Unfortunately, lookism really kind of comes into play in this particular area. And we found a lot of women struggling with this idea of having to look younger or act younger. And so be cognizant of that. They're really there to support, and we come in all shapes, sizes, ages, and looks. 50 is the new 50, 60 is the new 60. So keep that in mind as well, too. Another cool thing that we found is that retirement is taking on a new phased meaning among this group. And so what we're seeing is that many women are retiring from one career. So maybe they were an accountant for the majority of their time, but they get to be 40, 50, and now they've got a renewed sense of, what do I want to do in my next act? And so we found a lot of women pursuing other careers, retiring from one and moving on to another. And in some cases, by 40, 50, some women had already retired out of 3 careers and were looking into their 4th. So with that, I say, they may not necessarily have the track record when they apply for a different job out of their scope. However, consider their transferable skills and their soft skills. Many of those could bring much more value than someone who's probably gone down the line of, building that profession or building that career track. So be cognizant of everything else that they could bring to the table. And then lastly, they're lifelong learners, just like us. Just because we're out of college doesn't mean we stop learning or enjoying learning. So they want to also come into an organization that will allow them to not only continue to grow, so create opportunities for continued growth, but then also create opportunities to share that knowledge and that wisdom with younger counterparts and with managers. So at the end of the day, I'm going to leave it with this. Women want to work. Like, they're not going anywhere. We're just simply asking is give us a fair shot. Don't overlook us. And you will be rewarded for your investment in our futures as well, too.
Lupe, thank you. So I think both you and Helen have articulated kind of a lot of the strengths and skills and attitudes that older workers bring to the table. Karen, I want to end this segment by giving you kind of the bottom line question. I've seen research, and it's in the Encore Network's Employer Guide, that older workers actually in age-diverse teams are more profitable. Tell us about that and why that is. And is that true?
Yes, and yes. So in terms of performance, productivity, and profitability, I'm going to touch on both of those, Janine. And for all the reasons that Helen and Lupe talked about, all those great assets that older adults bring to the table. On the performance and productivity side, there are surveys that have been done that, and I'm looking right directly at the guide right now, that say 87% of employers say their older employees perform as well or better than younger employees. This is research data that says, we aren't seeing that huge discrepancy of the older person. Hey, they're falling off. They're not performing. They're not meeting expectations. When it comes to the profitability side of the equation, Janine, you and I know this specifically here in Colorado. We actually did research that actually looked at if we were to add 5, 10, 15 years of even part-time employment to an older adult who might have chosen just to retire at 65, maybe works till 70, 75, or 80, we could grow the economy here in Colorado by billions of dollars, billions of dollars. Now, even AARP has done surveys and studies that say GDP per capita would grow by 19% over the next 3 decades, capitalizing on the skills, the expertise, and the strengths of the older adult, and for all the reasons Helen and Lupe pointed out. The other thing that I would add is not only would it help the economy, but individually, we have more money for retirement savings. We're helping reduce the cost of those programs. So there's a huge case for performance, productivity, profitability.
Okay. So I love the fact that it's not only kind of the right thing to do, but it also makes sense for our businesses and for the overall economy. Here's what I hear. So you know that I spend a lot of my time talking to employers about the business case for older workers and intergenerational teams. And that's really important to us at Changing the Narrative. And also I know to the Encore Network, because we are not about pitting one group against another. We think what we know is the strength comes in, I think, as somebody said in the chat, in age diversity. And I also know, because this is what I hear from employers that I'm talking to, there are a lot of outdated myths and stereotypes that get in the way. I'm going to go around to each of you and queue up 2 stereotypes, and I'm going to ask you really quickly, literally in 2 minutes, to maybe 1 minute per stereotype, to refute these stereotypes that I keep hearing. So Karen, 2 of the stereotypes I hear, well, yeah, but older employees are more costly and they can't keep up. Refute it.
Okay, most costly, you know what, to Helen's point, and actually a survey done by AARP, the average older adult will stay 4 times as long as a younger person. And this is not fault, blame, hey, they're not responsible. Younger people are going through a lot more transitions. Older people stay on the job longer, less training costs, better, access to all of the data about the culture of the organization, the projects they've been working on, and more. In terms of the idea that they're not staying current, Transamerica Institute survey 65 plus, key question, what are you doing? Are you doing anything to keep your skills current? In fact, nearly 50% responded saying, I'm upskilling, I'm reskilling, I'm next skilling. I realized that I'm going to live for decades longer. I want to be prepared to be able to engage in the workforce. And the only way I'm going to be able to do that is if I have the tech skills. I understand which are those careers that I might be able to shift into, what's in demand. So I think that, more costly, no, I don't think that's the case. And definitely seeing a huge increase in programs for older adults to upskill, reskill, and an interest to do the same.
Okay, go Karen. Helen, your 2 myths and stereotypes you need to refute. This is the Mythbuster squad here. Older employees are not able to learn and they are less engaged.
False.
Okay, that's good. We're moving on to Lupe. No, go ahead.
So I think it's really fascinating because this is a big one. People think that older people can't learn and they don't engage. We have different brains when we get older. There are more networks in the brain. There are more connections. Therefore, we have what's referred to as crystallized intelligence as opposed to what young people have, which is fluid intelligence. The 2 complement each other. But our brains tend to get smaller with age, but they peak at age 30. There's a whole lot of misinformation about brain and what we can do. We may need, because I liken it to a hard drive. There's more in our hard drive than when we're younger. So it takes a bit longer to process information, and that's a fact. But we also have greater cognitive reserve, and we have what's referred to as bihemispheric processing, which enables us to have multi-perspective problem solving. Now, who wouldn't want that, right? The other thing is we don't multitask as well, but we have much greater single focus and a sharper sort of information discrimination ability. In other words, we get the gist of things a lot faster. And probably one of the things that I find most fascinating was a finding by the New England Journal of Medicine, in which it said that the most productive stage of life is between 60 and 70, followed by those most productive in the 70 to 80 year range, and in the 3rd place, 50 to 60. That really blew my mind.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I'm so glad entering the 70 to 80 group that I still have productive years ahead of me. Thank you. Lupe, older workers take jobs from younger workers, and age discrimination really isn't a thing. Can you refute that?
Yes. No, there's no evidence proving that myth. In fact, older workers aren't taking jobs, away from our younger counterparts. We want to continue. We need to continue working in certain instances. And so it's a matter of, again, falls on the shoulders of employers recognizing the needs of both older and younger workers and finding a way to support both of our needs and desire to continue contributing to a rich workforce and work environment. I think on top of that too, I mean, if you think of it, we just talked a little bit about it. I mean, both Helen and Karen mentioned it, as well as you too, Janine, that our older workers are bringing unique skill sets and talents that help train our younger counterparts, that help enrich their lives, help them, pass on legacy knowledge or learnings. So I feel like it's an opportunity for us to create synergies rather than what I think one of us mentioned a little earlier was this othering idea, this concept of us against them. I think that permeates our social culture, our work environment, and I think that is created sometimes ingrained in our mindset and our psyche that it imprints in such a way that we bring that to the workforce. And so I think we need to get past that, recognize that we can both learn from each other. There is a bi-directional opportunity to grow and learn alongside each other. And I feel that, older workers can bring a renewed sense of morale, learning, productivity, engagement and tenure to younger workers. Heck, I know I love the movie The Intern with Robert De Niro. I don't know if anyone else watched it, right? But
somebody in the chat actually mentioned
did it?
Right. Yeah.
Fantastic. I'm not the only one, out there thinking there's opportunities for us to create opportunities and truly create friendships. But I think that's rooted in the idea that we need to get to know each other first, get to know the person. Don't judge the book by the cover. And that goes both ways, younger and older, right? So there's room for potential. It's just a matter of us showing up, with the willingness and the employers creating the environment to create that type of synergy and growth.
Okay. So, my constant saying is let's not just talk about it, let's be about it. So we have talked about the benefit of older workers and intergenerational teams. You all now have successfully swept those myths and stereotypes to the floor where they should be. What are concrete actions that actually employers and workforce development centers can take about it? And Lupe, I'd love to start with you because I've heard you talk about the importance of anti-ageist audits. What is that and what is the value to companies? Yeah,
so anti-ageist audits is this idea that businesses, just like people, sometimes get used to functioning in a comfortable space. We put up our website, we put up our marketing materials, our jobs, we kind of get into this autopilot routine where we forget to kind of go and look back and see, do an audit on our own business, on our own approaches, policies, and programs to see if, in fact, we are doing a good job at supporting age diversity in the workplace. And so an audit would very much look like what the Encore Network did in their Employer's Guide. And I recently put a series of ideas and tips into a blog that I contributed to Changing the Narrative that hopefully will be coming out this week. But it's this idea of being cognizant, going through a checklist, whether it's once a year, once every 2 years, but the idea saying is being aware that things change. So perhaps it may be, and I'll just give a couple of examples, but maybe it's, reviewing internal and external marketing to see if you're promoting age diversity in the images, videos, and copy that you use on your website. How many times have we gone to a website and we see nobody that looks like us, right? Mm-hmm. Do you want to apply to that job? Do you want to do business with that job? No. So being cognizant of the image of the idea that you're putting out there is super important for organizations to keep in mind. It's also maybe perhaps even taking a look at the current makeup of your employee base, your new hires and your recent layoffs. What's the trend that you're seeing there? Am I laying off all of my older workers and solely hiring young? Am I, creating, basically generational gaps within or employment gaps within my, hiring trends that all of a sudden is going to leave me in a pickle in a few years? Evaluating who even, comprises my recruiting and hiring team, for example. Are they all similar in age, gender, ethnicity? What are my marching orders to them? Are they going out and finding the typical candidate that we all seem to say, falls into the cultural fit? that we're trying to create within our organization. Put that on the shelf. Forget the cultural fit. Find someone that actually complements and brings value to your organization versus just simply saying, I'm going to hire someone that looks just like me or acts like me. So those are just a few tips. You can definitely get more at the Employer's Guide. I know that they put a link in the chat, or check out my Changing the Narrative blog for more ideas on what you can do to get yourself working towards an age-inclusive work environment.
Lupe, terrific. And Sarah, maybe if I can ask you to put a link to the Changing the Narrative blog site so that people will be able to see when Lupe's blog pops up. Oh, Lupe's blog it's been published. Hooray. So people can read those tips right now. Helen, I know you advise employers on what they can do to recruit and retain older workers. What are some of your top tips?
Well, first of all, a lot of what I have to say is similar to what Lupe said earlier when she talked about the women. Out of the gate, we have to tackle ageism. And so the first thing I think that has to happen is that, diversity initiatives have to include age, and they typically don't. We know the percentage is something like 8% globally. And I think what you said earlier, Lupe, that older workers and women really want work that's interesting to them. Early on, before 60, they work because of compensation. Later in life, they work for purpose or for social impact. So you have to design roles that are meaningful to older adults, filled with purpose. So they're not just jobs. And you have to ensure that there's a lot of interaction so that personal relationships are able to develop. Because again, as I said earlier, that network, that social network is really critical as well. You need to remember that they need training as well, and don't just limit training. If you want to interest somebody or recruit them, talk about what they can still do or what you're able to do to help them develop their various skills. The other thing is showing an understanding for the stage that these people are at. So as an older employee, you tend to want more autonomy and flexibility. And that's why there's so many people who are returning to work now, because there's so many more opportunities with remote work. But you talk about internship and returnships. There's something called grandternships, I think, too, or I made it up. But as older people begin to have grandchildren and want to take time to spend with them, give them that time, make it a bit more flexible, offer opportunities for them to job share, for instance, or take project work. All those kinds of creative ways of offering work really enhance opportunities for people who don't want to work the way they used to, but they really want to work still. The other thing is, of course, mentoring. I think that happens informally, extremely successfully in workplaces, but you can formalize it as well. And it's a role that you can offer older adults who tend to want to do something positive. The other thing is paid sabbaticals or paid training. Let people go away for a little while. The other thing that I want to mention has to do with, our changing bodies and the kind of work that we do. You can put in place a number of accessibility techniques or items, such as ergonomic furniture. I remember studying all of this when ADHD children need to move around more. So put wheels on the chairs and they pay more attention. Well, you can design furniture, and it's already designed for people who have certain issues with their back or sitting and so on. So those are the kinds of things that you can really, accommodate their needs and also accommodate your own and increase productivity.
Okay, Helen, thanks so much. And I've put, again, a link to the employer guide in the chat, because the Encore Network's employer guide has several pages of really concrete, specific things, very much the kind of things that Lupe and Helen shared, but other things that employers can do both in job design, in recruiting, in hiring and retention to go ahead and gain those benefits of older workers in intergenerational teams. Karen and Melanie, I'm actually going to bring you back in. Thanks for staying with us. Karen, let's start with you. in Colorado, share a little bit more about what you're seeing in workforce centers and their efforts to support older job seekers. And I'd like to hear from both you, Karen, and from Melanie. Where do you see opportunities for growth in programming so that we can, if we're older and we are willing to learn and we want to get that reskilling and upskilling for new jobs, what are the things that we can do? So, Karen, I'll start with you, and then Melanie, you didn't know I was going to bring you back in, but thank you for staying on. Karen.
So, I think there are some things that workforce centers are doing today. Janine and I are involved in a older worker policy collaborative, and we actually did a survey to the workforce centers here in Colorado because we wanted to know. And Melanie, we actually thought we would go to the workforce centers thinking we could influence them, but now we know we should go to the boards. What we found was of those workforce centers that responded, about a third actually had programs geared towards the 50 plus population. Now, those programs might have included peer networking groups that would meet every couple of weeks. Janine and I actually had a chance to participate in one. And it's older adults who actually get together to talk about their challenges, some of the strategies they were using. Several of the workforce centers, actually 3 specifically, actually deployed the AARP Back to Work 50 Plus program. And very successfully. They run it 3 or 4 times a year, maybe 3 to 6 sessions. It really depended on the different workforce center. And it was really getting those people who had been out of work or kind of looking to re-career, orient in a new career, kind of get them current on how do I look for a job today if I haven't looked in 5 or 10 years? Where are the resources? What do I need to be thinking about as we move into the social media world and the new way of applying online? The other thing, in terms of other opportunities, again, I'm going to piggyback on work we did with Changing the Narrative. We actually went in and did presentations to the staff of the workforce center and to employers about changing the narrative, really talking about ageism so that the staff understand that there is unintentional and rarely intentional ageism, helping them overcome that and really helping employers think about that. So we did that throughout the state of Colorado with many of the different workforce centers. One other example I would point to, and this is really a northern county here in Colorado, they actually got state funding to develop a micro internship program focused on 50 plus. So it was a micro internship program for people who said, hey, you know what? I've been in this career. It's kind of like going down the tubes. This is an industry that's not going to exist. How do I reskill? They got the funding to be able to pay the staff or this person who would go in the micro internship for a period of time. I think it was 3 months. And then that became an opportunity for the company to test drive the employee to test drive the company, and a chance at a full-time job. As we
so
look
kind of like the intern on a small scale,
right? On a tiny
like the movie The Intern. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. The opportunities, and again, I always point to this data, the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Melanie, you probably know this, like the fastest growing segment of the workforce, 75 years old and above, fastest growing. Those are likely people who have been out and wanting to get back in. So it will be critical for workforce centers to be thinking about what kind of projects, programs, opportunities do I create to help get those people in to solve the problems of the employers seeking work. The other thing I would say that another area for workforce centers is partnerships. We asked the workforce centers here in Colorado, like, who are you partnering with for the age, the older adult population? Like, how many have a relationship with their area agency on aging? 3 said they had a relationship, but I followed up with the area agency and they said, well, we know about each other, but we really don't work closely together. So I think there are some amazing opportunities in terms of partnerships to really grow the connection to get those people employed, serving employers and the economy and the individual.
Karen, thank you. Melanie, we're just talking about partnership with workforce centers. Perfect time for you to jump in.
Music to my ears. So to piggyback on something Karen said about, training the American Job Center staff, we have an initiative we call Family-Centered Employment. And the idea is focusing on the whole family. And something we did, and Karen hit it on the nose there, it's retraining staff how they're engaging with that customer walking through the front door, getting rid of the bias, talking about, informing them of maybe different needs or different skills or support services. So I think that's really critical. Again, the workforce board, as I said, is going to set the priorities and they're going to set the funding. But that individual who is that first person somebody's going to see when they walk through the front door is so critical to the success somebody's going to have when they're going through that process. So I think that's very critical. And the partnership piece. Workforce boards are driven by, labor market information. What are the needs in that community? What are the jobs? What populations they need to focus on. But they often, they can't be the answer or the expert in everything. And so partnering with those others, whether it is a community organization or it is another agency within their community, is very critical. Workforce boards are limited. There's a really funny little rule in the law about what they can do around outreach versus marketing. And that's a big tension with the workforce boards. We have been pushing the Department of Labor to put out some guidance to help clarify that, which came out last Friday, which we're thrilled about, which will help workforce boards think about how they're reaching different communities. But I also think that's a big part of the partnership piece, working with partners in the community to reach older workers where they might be, and then take that information back. So I think those are two areas where are ripe for partnership, ripe for information. Workforce boards live in data. That's how they make their decisions. So all those points that we've all talked about, some that Karen just mentioned, some that I had in my PowerPoint, when you can point to that, that's what's going to drive them.
I think that is so interesting, especially the part about the difference between outreach and marketing and what you can do. So I think really, mindful for all of us to know that. So this is now time, people who have been listening and being very active in the chat, to go ahead and ask your questions. If you would go ahead and put them in the chat and I'll queue them up. But some questions have already come up, so I'm going to go ahead. And we have a question from Sarah who says, how much of the gap between open jobs and older adults who aren't finding work is due to a mismatch of skills? Does anybody want to take that on? And potentially, I'm going to add on to that, how could the workforce centers help with that? Anybody?
I will say from the American Job Center's perspective, when somebody walks through the front door, one of the first things that's going to happen is that skills assessment, and figure out, where that person sits. And then that's when all of the training opportunities or wraparound services. But that's when employers are really critical in this conversation, really focused on what are the competencies or skills. I think one of the, most damaging things we've done as a society is that the only pathway to success is this, 4-year degree. And that's, some sort of metric of competency or skills to do a job. So it's been really gratifying for us to see more of a focus on competency and skill-based hiring. So more emphasis on that, but that's really, that gold standard of a really good workforce board and the system that they've set up is that somebody's getting that skills assessment and they're being connected to that navigator that's going to help, them work through some of their path forward.
Yeah. Melanie, thank you. Karen.
I would add that, just for example, the difference between that 5.2% of unemployed older adults and what the state reports is something like 50,000 older adults seeking work. In the state of Colorado, we have something like 100,000 job openings. So I just lay that out there. But the part that I would talk about is I have connected with Arapahoe Douglas Works, which is a workforce center. And he actually showed me the data across the state of Colorado between where the jobs were and the skills gaps. And it was tens of thousands of people overall that looking for work did not have the skills. And so he was saying from Arapahoe Douglas's perspective, how do we figure out, how do we connect them? Because we know they don't have the skills. The challenge is, Sarah, is we really have to figure out, how do we have that AI or that algorithm that really figures out, oh, Karen has half the stuff and I need to send her to this program to get her into this position. So it's astounding what the gap is. A lot of people looking don't have the skill set.
Right. So that seems like a right area of opportunity. Lupe.
Yeah, if I could add to that too. So through our work, what we found too, and this is, we've been talking about what the employer can do. I think also we need to recognize that internal ageism is a real thing as well too.
That's what I was going to say.
What I found is that in our community, a lot of women weren't even applying for a job. Men typically tend to apply to a job if they've got like 50, 60% of the skills that the job is requiring. Women won't apply for a job unless they've got like 80 to 90, sometimes even more than that, and like 100% in some cases for a job. So I feel like in addition to what employers can do and what, Melanie and Karen talked about, I think also we need to look at our own selves and what are we limiting what we are pursuing? Why are we not going after those jobs? Why are we discounting our skills? We may not have all of the skills, but that doesn't mean you can't learn on the job. That's part of what we do and we expect from our younger counterparts. Why would that not be the same here with our older counterparts? So I would say, making sure that you can look at yourself in the mirror and say, hey, this is why I'm not, joining or not applying, and being honest with yourself about it. And if you're not hitting the 90%, that's okay. Go for it anyway. All they can say is no. You learn and you move on. And then if anything, it gives you a gauge on what you then need to go out and learn on your own. So I would say, a little bit of that has to do with our own outlook on how we see ourselves and limit ourselves sometimes.
So Lupe, you have queued up, and we only really have time for one more question. And this is a really big question that we could do a whole session about, but we're not going to do that because I'm looking at my timeline and I've got to wrap this up in 5 minutes. So there are closing remarks. Here's the big question, and it's about kind of gender differences. You've already spoken to one. We know that somebody observed that on this call, probably 90% of the people who participated were women. That is something that we have found a lot at Changing the Narrative when we partner with our workforce development centers and we offer workshops on success strategies for workers age 50 and over. Predominantly women attend. And I will share this one anecdote briefly. When our work was covered in a local newspaper, and it was about ageism in the workplace and, the kind of things that you could do. I got a lot of calls from men who tracked me down on LinkedIn and who said, I want to talk to you about this. And I said, great, we're doing this workshop of this class. They didn't want the class. They didn't. So I feel personally that there's a bit more of a stigma, maybe that men feel about seeking help, and maybe what they want is more one-on-one, and going to a group class is sort of admitting that you don't know it. I'm speculating here, but it's interesting to me, the difference in approach. I'd love any of your observations about how this issue plays out, older women versus older men. Helen, you want to jump in?
Well, I just want to reinforce what you say. I think that in fact, it's in the brain, and it has to do with emotional connection and so on. And there are differences. There are clearly differences. I have exactly the same experience, that women will talk about their experiences, will become vulnerable, and they're more process oriented. Men typically are not. And therefore, they find that some of these conversations touch on areas that they are not comfortable speaking about or talking about. Their egos are in a different place to a large extent. And, they've lived in a place in our society that has been dominant. The patriarchy lives on still. And so there's a lot of issues that they have to confront as well. And that's talking about people of my generation and your generation. That is not as much the case with younger men today.
So Helen, thank you for bringing that up. And I do want to shout out, because there are a couple of men who are Encore Network members who I think are running very successful groups that tend to skew men. So I'm thinking like Mark Miller of Career Pivot. I know Doug Dixon and Tim Lieberger, who, jointly co-chair the Encore Network's over 50 plus affinity group. Do you think so? I want to be careful about stereotyping men and women, but I think this is a pattern that we've all observed. Anyone else, Lupe, Karen, or Melanie, want to jump in on this question?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think what we found in our work as well, too, is just, it's the unfortunate reality of cultural outlook on men versus women, right? And that it leads to even our pay gap that we currently have at all ages for women, right? This idea that men are, are looked at as this idea of, we are we're contributing. We're the the heads of our households. We are like Helen was mentioned. We're the patriarchs, and so I think it's this idea that they've got this outlook, or they assume this need to fill a role that is out there, a perception that where they should be, about patriarchy. And so for them, I think it's a little bit harder for them to admit that they don't have a job, or that they are struggling with ageism, for example. But truth be told, unfortunately, men are looked at as debonair, are looked at as, wise, are looked at as valuable and contributing, whereas women, as we age, those are not the same descriptors. So there's still an unfortunate disparity between how women are looked at, even in our, as we age. And so that's one thing that I think we still, both from a cultural, social, but also from a workforce standpoint, need to be cognizant of when we're evaluating the effects of ageism on both men and women.
So I'm feeling that we could keep talking about this probably for another hour. And I'm looking in, I've got to transition over to Karen, but I do want to make, I want to just raise this issue, and maybe we can talk about it in a future Encore Network program. Omar has raised how important it is for us to look at intersectionality as well. The workforce needs older adults, but age isn't the only deterrent, and how we look at the intersection of age and race and ethnicity and ability, and all the things. And one of the things that I know, again, this is from our work at Changing the Narrative, that the people who end up in the most dire financial straits as they get older are women, because we are more likely to have paid less over a lifetime, stepped out of the workforce, caregiver for children or for older family members. If you're a woman of color, double and triple that, right? So Omar from the Colorado Leadership, I'm going to get this wrong, so I'm just going to say Omar for Claro. Thank you for bringing that up. Always a great partner of Changing the Narratives. Karen, I need to turn this back over to you, and not to answer this question, but my notes say you are going to talk about what's next and coming up for the network. I want to thank all of you for participating. Melanie, Karen, Helen, and Lupe, I can't think of better panelists on this topic. Karen, I'm handing you the virtual mic.
Thank you so much. And just know, everybody, we will be sharing Melanie's PowerPoint, and should we get additional information from their survey or other data, we will share that with the people who have attended today. I do want to let you know about an event coming up in October, and it will be October 18th from 12 to 1. That's 12 to 1 Eastern, 9 to 10 Pacific. And it's sort of piggybacking on this event specifically. It's titled How Age-Friendly Employers Are Benefiting from Older Workers. So we actually will have Heather Tinsley Fix, who heads up the financial resilience and the AARP Pledge, on board talking about all they do in the AARP Pledge, how they work with employers, the kinds of resources they have for older adults. And then we'll actually premiere a handful of companies who are specifically engaged with the pledge and modifying and evolving their own programs to recruit and retain older workers. So I would encourage you, and actually if our Kelly from Encore Network is still on, if you could put in the chat just a link to the Encore Network website, people could actually sign up for that event. Again, it's October 18th, 12 to 1 Eastern, 9 to 10 Pacific, an hour-long forum. I would also point out that when you're on our website, please do take a look at membership. I mean, this is an organization that is really our mission, coalition of leaders who champion the civic, social, and economic contributions of people 50 plus by creating community, stimulating learning, and inspiring action to transform the Encore stage of life. So the seminars, the webinars, free or paid over the next year, are going to be focusing on these things, and we'd love to invite you in. Join the Encore Network. We'd love to have those new members. Kelly, I think you might have a poll survey you want to launch. That might maybe that's coming up in the next posting in the chat box. There we go. So if people could take just a minute to answer that before you leave. We thank you so much for joining us, and we invite you again, October 18th. We look forward to seeing you there.
Okay. Take a moment to fill out the poll, if you will. It's really important to the Encore Network. And I want to thank you all for your interest and your participation. I get so excited when I see that this large number of people who care as much about this issue as I do. And I also know and truly believe that together we really can make a difference. We've seen it happen in different communities across the country. Many of you on this call are leaders in this movement. And that is why I am both so proud and thankful to the Encore Network for producing this excellent guide. Any of us can take anything in the guide, go ahead, use it, write articles about it, share it on your website. Somebody asked me about this. Share it with your friends, whatever. Let's get the word out. There is a business case for older workers and intergenerational teams. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.